Welcome back to the bench. I'm Paul, and today we're wrapping up the BRDM project with a small scenic base. I started by cutting a circle from 1mm grey card as a cutting mask for the foam cutter. I used thumbtacks to keep it in place. The idea for this build was that it would be a Serbian police BRDM at the end of its life. I originally thought I'd make a warehouse or a workshop building to suggest it was about to be salvaged for scraps. After I blocked out the rough shape of the building though, I didn't like how much of the backside of the model it obscured, and it made the composition feel very cramped. Instead, I decided to cut it down to a loading bay height. This way we still get the opportunities afforded by some elevation change on the base without the negatives of the full building. Some stairs cut from offcuts helped to round out this new idea, which would be set in an industrial setting with concrete slabs and maybe some kind of grass bank or vegetation for interest. The grey card came back out again to wrap up the edges of the base. With some quick measuring and cutting, it was ready to be secured to the foam with double-sided tape. The foam cutter didn't give the cleanest edges, so this step serves to create a uniform edge and sets us up well for a nice clean job at the end. Use the same tape to attach our loading platform, being careful to make sure it's stuck in the right place. The advantage of the tape is that if you get it wrong, you can just pop it off and try again. I made sure all of the edges of the foam was properly covered with the tape. The last thing we want is for this to come off further down the road. I left the base flat on my cutting mat when wrapping the card. This makes sure that the bottom edge is clean and level. I cut away the excess and glued the edge with super glue. This card really soaks it up and it makes it possible to sand and shave away any sharp edges. Cork is a great starting material to recreate old concrete, but be careful the type you get. I have two types here, a fine smoother type and a rough one with larger chips. This one rips better and works way better for our purposes. I use the same piece of card as before as a template to cut the cork. Our base is bigger than the template now after the layers of foam and card, but this will work because we want gaps to separate our slabs anyway. I cut the raised area away, and after checking that the shape was right, I used the lines on my cutting mat to create even and perpendicular cuts to create these rectangular slabs. Gluing stuff to this foam is never fun. I tried PVA to begin with, using pins to hold it down, but I've also found that spraying activator on the foam and then super glue on the cork works even better. Usually, super glue melts this XPS foam, but with the activator it cures straight away and creates the bond we need. Just make sure you keep track of what pieces go where. I kind of lost what orientation the small piece in the middle was meant to be in, and it took a bit of time to figure it out. Cork is a great material for this because it's super easy to create realistic cracks and breaks by simply ripping it into pieces and placing it back together afterwards. Using a mix of gluing strategies, I eventually got the ground stuck down and I cleaned up the edges of the cork as well as refined some of the cracks. You can use tweezers or a hobby knife to chip away the edges and set us up for some more realistic cracked concrete later. I used the finer type of cork for the concrete on the upper layer. It's finer and is better for fresher, less damaged concrete, which makes sense because it doesn't have the weight of vehicles constantly rolling over it up here. A lot of this process is just cutting and sticking and just forcing things to line up with as much trimming as necessary. I measure directly on our base with a pen, offer things up and cut them as needed. My main priority is to cover up the foam. It doesn't like solvents and I don't want to accidentally melt something later on during painting and weathering. Next up, I pulled out two texture pastes, AK's Dark Earth and AK's Concrete to be exact. Both are very similar, but Concrete maybe has a slightly finer grit. I used these pastes to fill the gaps between the plates and then blended the extra over the cork to fill some of the deeper troughs in the sheet. This unifies our surface a bit. We don't want to completely overwhelm the existing cork texture, we just want to bring it one step closer to real concrete by leveling it out with the dark earth. While I'm doing that, I would super appreciate if you like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're wrapping up the first project of the channel here today and there's plenty more to come in the future. I think our next project is going to be smaller in scale, but still an icon of the Second World War, so stay tuned for that. I used the finer concrete texture to cover the pieces of the card. This simulated a plastered surface on our loading bay wall. I leave it thicker in some places and thinner in others to create a more interesting texture. I I also covered our foam steps at this stage. This layer of acrylic paste serves to protect the foam from solvents while also creating a texture on the surface. An added bonus was that the imperfections in the stairs meant that each level ended up looking like the layers you get in poured concrete from the framing process. Finally, I did a final pass of the concrete paste to fill gaps around the edges and to blend out our work from earlier. Safety first, I thought, so I grabbed an old figure from the spares box to help estimate the height of a handrail for the stairs. I think he's a mini art World War II civilian, not that it matters, I'm not using any figures on this base. I used a tea light to heat up the piece of sprue. If you time it well, you can bend it to the right angle before it melts fully. This step was repeated for the second bend, and again I used the grid on my cutting mat to make sure it was all at the right angles. Happy with the shape and location, I stuck it into place. I wanted to add a few detail elements to our base here too. I have some 3D printed concrete blocks which I stacked up randomly and loosely around the dead area in front of the stairs, and I glued them into place. PVA is good enough for this, and the aim here is to design a random layout, antithetical as it may sound. With a lot of the wet work with the pastes complete, I got some much thinner brown card, more of a thick paper card, and stuck it around the edges once again. This way we can hide the edges of the cork with the added bonus of a smoother finish for painting later. Once again, texture paste was used to clean our edges and fill in any gaps. It's worth taking some time here to do this right. It's much easier to do this now than after painting starts. A folded piece of the same brown card was used to simulate a metal piece seen on reference pictures, presumably to protect the edge of the concrete from constant use and potential damage from vehicles. I trimmed this to size after the PVA glue dried. If you watched the previous episodes, you'll know that we added LEDs to this BRDM, and the wires are sticking out from the bottom along the side of one wheel. I placed it onto the base and marked where the wires ended up with a metal sculpting tool. I made sure it was clear on the top side before turning the base over and tearing out an area where we can hide all the extra wires as well as our small little battery pack. To reinforce the idea of a scrapyard or workshop setting, I printed some extra details like pallets, toolboxes, and even some tools. I found these on Cults 3D, and the pallets were printed at a deliberate angle so that the layer lines ran the same direction as the wood grain would have. I removed them from their supports, cleaned them up, and got them ready to stick down to the base. The PVA glue here allows us some time to arrange everything how we want it. If it doesn't look right, it's as simple as taking it off and trying again. After gluing a mug down, it was back to our deliberate randomness, trying to imagine a mechanic pulling out all of his tools to find the one he wants from the bottom of his toolbox. I decided to glue these pieces into place before painting. They're so small and delicate that I was afraid I'd just break them if I tried to leave them separate. Our final printed detail was a little cat, a teaser for the story we're setting up in just a minute. I mixed up some green stuff. I'm no sculptor, but I think it did an okay job of making pieces of bread and bits of sandwich before placing it on some cigarette paper to make a wrapper. I glued all these down to the base next to the cat. I imagine the mechanic decided to take a pee break before eating his lunch, and the cat took full advantage of his mistake. At this stage, I also cut some tiny pieces of wire and stuck them down to the base. These will be painted up as cigarette butts when we get to that step. After a very thin coat of plaster as a final unifying coat on our concrete, I filled the airbrush with black primer and I got to spraying. I focused on our printed details first. They have most nooks and crannies, and so it's important to get a good coat now in case we miss parts of them with paint later. Once everything was mostly primed, I loaded in some grey paint and then did a base of base coats or highlights in a way. A very mottled look was the plan here. This will give us more interesting final appearances. After a pass of the grey, I loaded in some white and I painted our loading bay wall as well as the cat, the sandwich, and just a generic edge highlighting pass. Next up, I whipped out the acrylics, base coating each item with their respective colours. Blue for the toolbox, brown for the wood elements like the palette. The tools were given a dark brown metallic before a highlight of silver. This suggests a patina effect in 2 easy coats, and then I thinned down a sand colour and made long strokes along the palette to create the wood grain. Tapped some red paint onto the second toolbox, not worrying about covering the whole thing. It's another way to create chipping effects. I'm avoiding the edges with the red so that they stay the bare metal silver. The cat's ham got some flesh tone and some pink, and then our metal trim and handrail got a coat of dark brown. It'll set us up for rust tones later. Everything was still looking a bit bright and monotone at this stage, so I pulled the oils out and I used browns and black to add some variety and some depth to our concrete. I added random dots of colour and then used white spirits to blend them all out into each other. This significantly darkened the concrete, but that's what we needed here. It's easy to brighten up and pick out details later. We're just focusing on tone and colour here. The thinned oils settle in the cracks and they silhouette some of our items like the tools and the sandwich. I stippled some white oils around the edges and raised areas. This brings in some lightness as well as some contrast and some texture. I also used thinned oils to create streaking on our loading bay wall. I didn't capture all of it on video, but the process was simple. Add vertical streaks and blend them out. I used blacks, browns, yellows and greens here. Any colour would show up clearly on a white painted wall. With a sponge and a brighter orange and yellow paint, I added rust chipping to the metal parts and added some depth with black and burnt sienna oils. My cat Jaffa is absolutely the type of cat to steal your sandwich out from under you, so I decided to paint the cat in her colours. This was easy enough to do with a small brush and a steady hand, just a bit of back and forth between the colours to get the pattern accurate. It took a while, but it's nice to immortalise her in this build. Can't forget her red collar. With a thinned light grey, I picked out some of the cracked edges of the concrete to push our contrast even further. I love this step, it's low stakes and it's super satisfying. I wanted to add some fallen leaves on the base, so I got matte Mod Podge and painted it around the corners and sheltered areas of the base. I sprinkled on some of the leaves, cleaned them up, and then did another pass of glue and leaves. These orange leaves and orange rust are going to contrast the vehicle nicely, and the rest of the colours we're using like white and grey are just there to fill out the extra space. In a way, without wanting to sound too artsy, the fallen leaves also match the idea we've had with the vehicle. It's had its time and it's at the end of its life. I gave all the edges a coat of matte black paint. The base was pretty much done and I'm happy with how it turned out. It tells a simple little story and reinforces our main subject well. I threaded the wires through the holes we made earlier and then added drops of glue to the bottom of the wheels and finally fixed the model in place. I suffered for a little while trying to solder the wires together, but it was worth it. The LEDs look great. Thank you so much for watching the fourth and final part of this Serbian BRDM 2 series. If you missed the earlier parts, I'd recommend going back to watch them. I promise they're good fun. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe if you want to watch the future ones. I'll see you in the next one.